Arguably the best transfer in the nation actually stayed in the Big East, is leaving Shaheen Holloway for Rick Pitino. This is getting spicy.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We are your host. This other fine gentleman is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch. And I want to remind you that you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You've joined us in the middle of transfer week here on Locked On College Basketball. On Monday, we hit the ACC. Yesterday, the Big 12. Today, Wednesday, we're going Big East. And it keeps on trucking. Tomorrow, Thursday's the Big 10. Friday's the SEC. And next Monday is a best of the rest. Andy, lots of fun. Here's how the layout works, folks. We're going to start by giving you the Big East first team, all transfer team as we see it. Then we'll give you a ranking of what we think the best classes in the Big East are. We'll tell you this right now, it ain't Marquette because they don't have any. And then we'll wrap it up with some superlatives. Always fun to hand out a few awards and see what's cracking. Andy, why don't you hit us with our first team, all Big East transfer team?
Yeah, a lot of really, really talented players transferring into the Big East, not a surprise whatsoever. A handful of them who are staying in the Big East and just transferring to different programs within the conference. That's the new era in college basketball. We're seeing a lot more of that. And you got to start the conversation with, again, arguably the most impactful transfer in all of college basketball during this cycle, Kadary Richmond going from Seton Hall to St. John's. Kadary Richmond is such a dynamic force. He is so versatile in what he brings to your team, both offensively and defensively. He was such a good player in Holloway's system at Seton Hall, but boy, he's going to be just great for Rick Pitino. I am so excited to see what he can do in Pitino's system with St. John's. He is one of the most intriguing players in all of college basketball next season, and the easy choice here for the top transfer in the Big East, but not easy because there aren't a lot of other fantastic options in this conference. It's really guard heavy. In fact, all five of the players we picked, I'm realizing this as I'm looking at the list, Isaac, are guards, fairly small guards for the most part as well. We also got Wooga Poplar heading from Miami to Villanova.
He's really our five. He's going to be our five.
He's the starting center for this roster here. Really like the fit at Villanova. Happy that Kyle Neptune was able to get at least one victory, 2 victories with Eric Dixon coming back, but not a great offseason overall, but Poplar's a big piece for that Wildcats team. We also got Pop Isaacs going from Texas Tech to Creighton, a player that I really like the fit there as kind of a replacement for Trey Alexander. They also got Jameer Neal replacing Baylor Shireman. We saw Greg McDermott be very intentional with the only 2 transfers that they brought in, but I think they fit really nicely, and Isaacs is a guy who I think is going to have a really big year for the Blue Jays. We got Malik Mack going from Harvard to Georgetown. Malik Mack was great last year for Harvard. Maybe not a name that a lot of people know, but somebody who I think is going to certainly turn some heads, especially if Ed Cooley is able to start moving Georgetown out of the cellar in the Big East and toward the middle of the conference. We'll see if they're a year away or if they're actually ready to make those moves, but whether that happens or not, Malik Mack's a really, really good player, and he's going to look great in that Hoyas uniform. And then number 5, we got Aidan Mahaney transferring from St. Mary's to UConn, having to replace 4 of 5 starters for Dan Hurley at UConn. They have quite a few players who are ready to step into bigger roles already on that roster, like Solomon Ball and Hassan Diarra, but we expect that Mahaney's going to play a really valuable role for that team. They're hoping he's kind of their next Cam Spencer alongside Liam McNeely, that they're going to kind of help fill some of those roles. I'm very interested to see how Mahaney adjusts from a very different system at St. Mary's than the system that Hurley runs at UConn. If he makes that adjustment well, he's going to be a really, really good player for the Huskies next year.
Yeah, Andy, I think there's a good opportunity for him to not have as much pressure on him. I think it felt to me like he often felt that at St. Mary's and sometimes was pushing too much. And I think this is an opportunity to just settle in and be one of the guys. He's going to have standout games. We're still going to get second half Mahaney sometimes, but I just don't think he has to feel that same pressure that he did. It's funny, Andy, you talked about it being all these guards. I'm curious your mindset on this. I never feel with these like all conference teams or all American teams, like you have to have a true, you could put this unit out on the floor team. I'm always of the mind, who are the best players regardless of position, and let's get them out there. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in this situation in particular, it makes sense too, because, certain teams aren't necessarily recruiting in the front court. We might see some, Ryan Kalkbrenner comes back, for example. Like there's certain teams that just aren't needing to get some bigs into the system. And so even like, UConn obviously needs to replace Donovan Clingan, but they're planning to do that with Samson Johnson. And so Terrace Reed doesn't really get, he's an honorable mention in this conversation. I think he's going to be good for them next year, but he's not necessarily being asked to fill that role. So trying to shoehorn an actual lineup just doesn't make sense when we're talking about, who we think is going to be the most impactful players. And for the Big East, just happens to be a lot of guards, just happens to be a lot of situations where good teams need to replace talented point guards who have departed via going to the NBA or just have themselves left in the transfer portal, whatever it may be. You see a lot of situations where some really talented guards are going to fill immediate role. I mean, there's a huge list of players that we haven't talked about yet who absolutely could be in this conversation. I think one of the rules, if you've listened to the previous few shows that we've kind of laid out, is not wanting to double up on teams. So we didn't want to have two players from St. John's in the top five, which is kind of the only reason that Devin Smith didn't make it into the top five. And he's another guard that's coming into Pitino's team. And we'll talk a little bit more about St. John's overall transfer portal class and the fit between Richmond and Smith. But, Garway Dools in this conversation, Leighton Blocker, Ryan Conwell, like there's a lot of guards that are going to have big roles next year in the Big East. So there's no reason in my mind to try to break up the team to be position by position when I think the best transfers in the conference are mostly going to be in the backcourt.
That's absolutely correct. And those guys that Andy just talked about are indeed the other, you could almost call them our second team all Big East transfers because they were our other five in the mix. But it is Garway Duel going from Providence to Seton Hall. Smith, who Andy just talked about, leaving Utah to come to St. John's, Utah, now a Pac-12, good grief, Big 12 school. Terrace Reed coming from Michigan to UConn. Again, it just feels like every year Dan Hurley just has those two bigs that are going to complement each other so well. Leighton Blocker coming from Arkansas to DePaul, where Andy, you and I were talking about this before we started recording today, that there was just that logjam of guards in Fayetteville last year. And I think this is an opportunity for Blocker to really shine at DePaul, where it's like, hey, lots of minutes to go around. And then Conwell leaving Indiana State after Josh Schertz leaves to go to St. Louis, and he will land at Xavier there in Cincinnati. So should be a lot of fun with those teams.
Well, Isaac, let's talk, instead of talking players, let's talk teams. We're going to talk about the best transfer portal class overall in the Big East, how we rank them, how we pick them. And like we said, we know it's not going to be Marquette. They don't have a single transfer coming in for Shaka Smart's program. We're going to talk about that as well, all coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, GameTime. Going to MLB games in the summer is one of my favorite all-time things. Going to the game, the food, the ballpark, everything that's part of that experience. I'm excited to make all new memories this summer at the ballpark. Got a few more months of baseball to collect. Thankfully, I don't have to sweat the high-priced last-minute tickets because GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and it makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And in fact, prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's concerned you're going to buy tickets from a third-party app and they're not going to be real, you might get turned away at the door, it's not going to be fun, GameTime has their ticket coveraging is the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. Personally, for me, I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. If you like going to Major League Baseball games around where I am in the Pacific Northwest, there's only one team. Those tickets, they may not be that expensive for the next couple months of the season. If that's the case, $20 off, that's a really nice deal for you. So create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, folks, thanks for joining us here today on our Big East Transfer Portal Update show. We've been doing one of these for every single conference, every power conference, I should say. We're going to do one on Monday of next week, wrapping up all the rest of the conferences, talking about the best transfers coming in, the best transfer classes, giving out some superlatives as well. If you want to learn more about UConn's transfer portal class in particular, with Terrace Reed coming in from Michigan, with Aidan Mahaney from St. Mary's, definitely check out the Locked On UConn podcast. Mark Zanetto's been at it for less than a year, already a wildly successful show. Helps to win a national championship, that is for sure. But definitely lots of great stuff on the Huskies over on that show. But Isaac, UConn, they're in our top 5 for transfer portal classes in the Big East, but they are not number 1. Why don't you tell us who number 1 is? And folks, if you listen to the first segment, you probably have a pretty good idea what team we're going to be talking about here.
That's right. Our number 1 team in the rankings, as Andy said, is not UConn. It is the St. John Red Storm. After last year with Rick Pitino coming over, man, they had a ton of dudes. This year, it's just a 4-person class, but we think in particular that this backcourt is just going to be absolutely loaded. Obviously, Kadary Richmond, we think, is the best transfer in the Big East. But look, let's not look past Davon Smith. As we said, if we didn't stop ourselves from having 2 players from the same team, we would have definitely had him on there as well. Those 2 guys should just have a blast in the Big East this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But you add in Vince Uwachukwu coming over from USC. You might remember him famously as the guy before Bronny that had the heart condition at USC. And, thankfully he's able to play now, and we love to see that. Also, you get Aaron Scott coming over from North Texas. But Andy, that backcourt is going to be something special to watch. And, we know we've seen lots of great Rick Pitino backcourts through the years. I think of like Russ Smith and Peyton Siva at Louisville as a great example of that. How about Creighton, Andy? Let's go to them next, and then we'll get your thoughts on this. With both our number 2 and 3 ranked classes, it is an issue of quality over quantity for Creighton. There are only 2 players coming in here, Pop Isaacs from Texas Tech and Jemiah Neal coming over from Arizona State. But we project both of them to be in the starting lineup along with the 3 returners, Stephen Ashworth, Mason Miller, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. And Pop Isaacs in particular, Andy, I know you've said you think is a great fit for this program.
Yeah, I really like the fit for Isaacs as kind of the replacement for Trey Alexander, who obviously Baylor Shireman got more of the attention last year for Creighton, but Trey Alexander, I think he averaged like 17, 5, and 5. He was incredibly good as a combo guard, could take the ball up the floor, run the point, and let Ashworth play off the ball. He could also kind of play off the ball and let Ashworth kind of take care of things. And I think that kind of tandem really worked well for Greg McDermott and the Blue Jays. And I think you get that again with Isaacs and Ashworth back in the mix. Neal is less likely to fully replicate what Shireman did, whereas I think Isaacs could be somewhat close to doing what Trey Alexander did. But Neal's a talented player in his own right. I think he fits nicely into that system. So this is a class where, like you said, it's only 2 players. It's 2 Power 5 players. It's 2 players who immediately expect to start on what I'm expecting to be one of the very best teams in the conference. So in that regard, it's hard to not have them there. And with St. John's, just quickly, same type of thing. It's 4 players. A couple of them are going to start. We'll see what they do in the front court. Aaron Scott was a very good defender last year, and I think that really helps make this team better. Same with, Richmond and Smith are good defenders too. I think Pitino's team is going to be better on the defensive end of the floor. There's a little concern on how they're going to space the floor. I think that's something that might be an issue. Neither Richmond or Smith are particularly high volume, good 3-point shooters. So I am curious how Pitino kind of
great point
works with that on this roster, but it's not something I'm overly concerned about. It's just a little nitpicky about what I think is ultimately a really good class. And so you got St. John's at 1, you got Creighton at 2. And like you said, third team here is UConn. Same type of thing with Creighton. It's a quality situation over quantity. Only a couple transfers coming in. You got Aidan Mahaney, who we talked about in the first segment. He's going to start. He's going to start at one of the guard positions alongside Hassan Diarra is the expectation there. Liam McNeely is going to probably fill the 3 spot with Caravan at the 4. That seems to be the projected starting lineup there. And then I would think Samson Johnson's going to step into the starting 5 role, which is part of the reason Creighton's class is ahead of UConn's class, because I think of the 2 players coming to UConn, only one of them is going to be a starter. But look no further than the last 2 years at UConn to know that the backup center is an important position for Danny Hurley, and the Huskies. Klingon filled that role. Obviously, Johnson filled that role last year. Terrace Reed gets an opportunity to fill that role this year. I think he's a nice fit in that system. We talked a bit about Mahaney's fit there, but Creighton and UConn are two of the top programs in the conference. And while their classes are not particularly big, especially compared to Xavier or DePaul, who have huge transfer portal classes, the quality of talent they're bringing in elevates them to the top of this list.
Andy, I almost said third. We just did third. Fourth on our list is Georgetown. Really excited for Ed Cooley to get into his second year, get a little more removal from being booed at Providence when they play there. But man, we have Malik Mack on our first team, as you talked about earlier, coming over from Harvard. But it's not just him. Micah Peavy brings in some great experience from TCU. We project both of those guys to be starters for the Hoyas. Mm-hmm. Jordan Burks comes over from Kentucky. Andy, he is in a battle, I would say, to be a starter. It's not a guarantee, but he's certainly a possibility. And if they can get 60% of their starting lineup out of the transfer portal, great players coming from, obviously with Burks, he's just buried at Kentucky, as lots of guys are, and should get a much better opportunity to shine a little bit at Georgetown. Also, Curtis Williams Jr. coming from Louisville. So two of these guys from within an hour of each other there in the Bluegrass State. And so, Andy, this, hopefully Georgetown can slowly start riding the ship. College basketball is better when Georgetown's good.
Yeah, I like this class for Georgetown. I think the focus is definitely on Mack and Peavy. Jordan Burks, what you get from him, I don't want to say it's gravy necessarily. You certainly have expectations for him, but if you're kind of gambling on him being someone who could really break out after not playing much at Kentucky, I think that's a reasonable gamble. I think Cooley can get that kind of production out of players, but this class is going to be judged primarily on how Malik Mack does moving from Harvard to Georgetown, and if Micah Peavy can play a quality role after coming over from TCU. But I like the group. I like the fits for Ed Cooley's system. I'm happy to see this program hopefully start to climb their way out of the cellar here, because like you said, it's better for college basketball when Georgetown's good, and we'd like to see there be less punching bags at the very bottom of the Big East Conference. And the last team here on our list, I'm a huge fan of this class. We talked about them a week or so ago on the show as well, is Seton Hall's class. And Seton Hall's class is interesting to me because it's a lot of players who I think are a little bit of gambles. Like there's a reasonable outcome where this class doesn't end up performing all that well. Like that's not a crazy thing. It's less safe than the classes at St. John's or Creighton or UConn or even probably Georgetown in terms of just like, Malik Mack's going to be good. Micah Peavy can play at this level. Whereas Seton Hall's class, it's a lot of potential sophomore breakout candidates. We talked about Garway Duel. I really like Garway Duel's fit in a Shaheen Holloway system. He's kind of similar to Kadary Richmond, obviously not at that level yet, but that's maybe where you think he could get to. Is he going to put up that kind of production in year two? The betting odds are going to say probably not, but he is a talented player who could at least start to get towards that kind of conversation. Scotty Middleton is a potential breakout sophomore candidate as well, coming over from Ohio State. He was averaged like less than 5 points a game last year as a freshman, but was highly regarded. Coming into that class, you get Chance Jenkins from Old Dominion, who's one of the better transfer up players. I think he averaged about 15 a game last year. Zion Harmon from Bethune-Cookman comes over. Gus Yalden from Wisconsin. He didn't play last year because he had some off the court issues with Wisconsin, but he was a 4-star prospect. If they can kind of right the ship with him, that helps you out. You get Emmanuel Okafor from Louisville as well. Like a lot of players, a lot of kind of upside swings for Shaheen Holloway, but that's what you have to do as a program that has been kind of documented that there's not as much NIL there as some of the other programs in the Big East. So you take some swings on some guys who maybe have seen their shine fall a little bit, and you see if they work out. And I trust Holloway to get the best out of a lot of these guys, and I think this class could end up it's riskier than some of the other ones, but I think it could end up being one that we look back on and we're like, wow, yeah, look what Shaheen was able to do in the 24-25 offseason.
Especially after losing Kadary Richmond, right? Like that's tough, and you got to rebound from that. Andy, quickly, our kind of honorable mention class was Xavier. We already talked about Ryan Conwell, who we had kind of in our honorable mention, all Big East transfer team, but Cameron Fletcher coming from Florida State, great athlete, love him. Don't miss on John Hughley, who's actually transferring in from Oklahoma, but was a great player at Pittsburgh for a couple of years there, so we'll keep our eyes on him. Andy, before we go to segment 3, I think one of the more intriguing things is Marquette, who, again, no transfers coming in for Shaka Smart. Andy, what are your thoughts about this kind of philosophy of not necessarily eschewing the transfer portal, but just not utilizing it?
Yeah, it made a little bit more sense last offseason that the team was basically everybody came back from last year's team. You know, they got Kolek back, they got Oso back, they got Cam Jones back, etc. And this year, I feel like it might have made more sense to utilize the transfer portal. Just as an outside observer, obviously, you lose Oso Ighodaro, you lose Tyler Kolek. Both guys get picked in the second round of the NBA draft. Incidentally, both guys look very clearly like NBA players, which I think a lot of people who watched college basketball last year would have told you, whereas a lot of NBA people are like, oh, wow, look at these guys. And it's like, yeah, no, those guys were great for many years at Marquette. But this is the year where I think it's really going to get tested for Shaka Smart. They have very talented players in this program. They lose 2 really good pieces. They have guys who can step into those roles. Jones, I think, is an All-American candidate next year. Shaka's a great coach, and he's going to utilize the talent that they have on the roster. But if you lose 2 NBA caliber starters and you don't replace them with veteran transfer portal additions like other programs are doing, like your friends in Omaha are doing at Creighton, where they're literally doing exactly that, replacing NBA players with veterans in the transfer portal. That to me is like, if Creighton jumps Marquette and they're not close in the rankings like they were all of last year, it's good. At that point, you start to wonder, should Shaka start looking at the transfer portal as opposed to just developing everybody through the high school recruiting ranks? And if he starts to not look to that, then I don't think his job security is not in any way dangerous at this point. But you start to wonder, like, even other schools who are thinking about hiring him, like, do we want to hire a coach who doesn't use the transfer portal? Like, it's going to start to become a conversation, especially if this Marquette team doesn't keep the train going with how successful they've been the last few years.
There's only one other power conference school who didn't utilize the transfer portal this offseason. We'll talk about them on tomorrow's show. Andy, it's superlative time. Which Big East newcomer is the best fit at his new school? And who among the transfers is the most likely to get drafted next year? We got that and more coming up. But first, I'll tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed or power or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back. Why? Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Factor Meals. Warm, sunnier days are calling. Fuel them up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll have new flavors to explore. Enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat well-balanced meals. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your entire next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. All right, Isaac, closing out our Big East transfer portal episode here, talking about the best transfers in the conference, who we project to be the highest performers, talking about the best transfer portal classes in the conference, talking about Marquette's lack of a transfer portal class and what that might mean for Shaka Smart's club. Now, as we've done on the last couple of episodes, we're going to do some superlatives here, talk which transfer we think is the best fit, the best up transfer from the mid-major level, some likely potential NBA draft picks from the transfers, sophomore breakout, post-hype sleeper, all sorts of fun conversations here. And Isaac, before we get into some of them, we're trying to talk about different players than we talked about. So we're not listing any of the guys that we mentioned on the all-first team. So yes, the best up transfer is probably going to be somebody like Malik Mack or Aidan Mahaney. But since we talked about them in the first segment, we're going to talk about different players here. Just want to make sure we get that out of the way so we're not seeing any outrage in the YouTube comments on some of the players we are or are not mentioning. Let's start with best fit. And here we're going with a player that we would have mentioned on that first team had we not had the rule about not having multiple players from the same team. That's Devin Smith. Isaac, why don't you talk to us a little bit about why we like this fit for Smith at St. John's coming from Utah?
What's interesting, Andy, when we haven't talked about this is actually his fourth school in college. Started at Mississippi State, went to Georgia Tech, then to Utah, and now he's moving to St. John. So not only is this his fourth school, it's his fourth conference.
And he's trying to hit every Power 5 conference.
Last year had a kind of a blow up there at Utah for the first time in his career, averaged double-digit points, 13.3 a game. But look, as a 6'1" guard, Andy, how about this? 6.3 rebounds a game at Utah last year to go with 7.1 assists. I mean, this dude has triple-double type numbers that he can give you. And that is really encouraging, not to mention that he shot 40% from three last year. That's a little bit of an outlier, though. He had never shot above 28% from three previously in his career. Not a great free throw shooter, so I think there's part of that. But, man, we love this fit for him in the backcourt for St. John's, along with Kadary Richmond, And so really, really good opportunity for him to get under one of the best coaches ever to do it in Rick Pitino. I'm excited for this fit. Also, in our honorable – oh, sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was just going to completely agree with you and mention the low volume of three-point shooting for Smith, too. I think an indication that may be a bit of a red herring, but hey, if Pitino can find a way to unlock some consistent outside shooting from him or from Richmond or from RJ Lewis or somebody else on that roster, that's really going to help open things up for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our honorable mention was Jacob Meyer, who is transferring from Coastal Carolina to DePaul. Really intrigued to how he will fit here in the system. I mean, he's a scorer and can just get buckets. We think he will just be unleashed to get out and go. Andy, you mentioned as we transition to up transfers, it's not going to be Malik Mack or Aidan Mahaney. So who is it?
Yeah, we're going with Ryan Conwell here, coming from Indiana State to Xavier. And we've seen Sean Miller really do some great things with transfers in the last couple of years. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we talked about Xavier or Sean Miller in some capacity, just because we've seen the Sule Boom type players. We've seen a handful of other guys have kind of come into that program. Last year, they had a couple of guys who really had big numbers. The mid-major transfers to Xavier, to Sean Miller's very high octane run and gun style offense has really worked. And I think with no disrespect to the other players that have transferred in the last couple of years, Ryan Conwell might be the best of the players that have come into that system since Miller's been back with the Musketeers. Conwell averaged just under 17 points a game last year for a very good Indiana State team. He's a good rebounder for his position. He's not a great facilitator. And again, that's like there is nothing Sean Miller gets more excited about than score first guards. That is the thing that he absolutely loves. He is not necessarily looking for big facilitators and distributors. He wants guards who have the ball in their hands, who are looking to score. And Ryan Conwell really fits that bill. He's a good three-point shooter, 40% last year on 7 attempts per game. This dude can light it up from beyond the arc. He can get to the rim. He can score multiple different ways. He's a good rebounder for his position. He's a good defender. I really like the fit. And I think if we're talking about up transfers in this conference, and we're not mentioning, the Malik Mack, who we already talked about, or Aidan Mahaney, Ryan Conwell's at the very top of this list. I think he's going to be excellent next year for the Musketeers.
And our honorable mention there would be Chance Jenkins coming from Old Dominion to Seton Hall. We're going to blow on past that because we're short on time. Andy, most likely NBA draft pick. We've got one that we've seen the production and one that has the body and the intangibles. We'll see if it comes together. That's Wooga Poplar is our top pick here, transferring from Miami up to Villanova. And hopefully, man, I just want to see Villanova be better this year. I'm so hopeful. And if so, Wooga Poplar and Eric Dixon are going to be the reason for that. Andy, Vince Uwachukwu, who we talked about earlier, is our honorable mention pick here, coming from USC to St. John's. He's got that NBA body and frame. Can he do it on the court?
Yeah, I there's a lot of guys who I think could potentially get drafted out of this transfer group, but Iwachukwu is a guy who has the absolute potential to really break out in a significant way for St. John's. And if he does that, his size, his ability to protect the rim, that's going to get him in the NBA. And another guy who I think a lot of people were probably surprised to not hear him mentioned here, and we're going to talk about him as a sophomore breakout, and that's Garway Duel. Garway Duel is a guy who had a lot of one and done buzz when he started his career at Providence. He didn't perform particularly well at Providence. He was buried on the bench. Then Bryce Hopkins got hurt and he had an opportunity to step into a bigger role, but ultimately Devin Carter just dominated so much of the ball for the Providence team last year that Duel just never really got those opportunities. He didn't take advantage of the opportunities he did get, but now he goes to Seton Hall. Again, he's kind of a mini Kadary Richmond type, like the profile is similar. Shaheen Holloway has a really good opportunity to develop him into a player who maybe we were just 1 year ahead of Garway Duel being a potential NBA player. I wouldn't shock me there. Whether he's an NBA guy or not, I think he's a really strong candidate to break out as a sophomore. Our honorable mention, sticking with the same program. That's why I like Seton Hall's class a lot. They brought in a handful of guys who might be breakout candidates next year. If it's not Garway Duel, don't be surprised if it's Scotty Middleton, less than 5 points a game last year at Ohio State, but a guy that had a lot of pedigree. I think he could, if the fit works well with him and Holloway, I think he could be a really nice player for Seton Hall next year.
Our post-type sleeper actually could have been part of the sophomore breakout crew as well. That's Layden Blocker coming to DePaul from Arkansas. Didn't really do much of anything last year at Arkansas. Again, being buried behind just a cavalcade of other guards. So we'll keep our eyes on how that goes. And our other post-type sleeper, we mentioned his name earlier, is John Hughley coming to Xavier, and who has played at Pitt and Oklahoma, had really good time at Pitt. And we're hopeful for him to bounce back in a big way. Andy, anything else to say before we get out of here from our Big East show?
It just would mention on Hughley, he's had 4 college seasons, only 2 of them where he played more than 10 games. The year that he played 32 games for Pitt, he averaged 15 and 8. He is a very, very talented player. If he is healthy and he is playing a full season for Xavier, he is absolutely going to be a player that turns a lot of heads next year in the Big East.
And think of it like he's a little bit of an undersized big, and so a lot of fun in that way. All right, you guys, thanks so much for joining us on our Big East Transfer Show. If you haven't subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on audio and video, make sure that you do that to make sure you don't miss a second. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd love to have you in there as well. It's free to join. The link is in the show notes. Man, come on in and be part of it. Another reminder, tomorrow on the show, we continue our transfer shows. We're going to get to the Big Ten and then close out the week with the SEC. Want to say, as always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.